you. All right. So with that said, thank you again to Monica and David for being here. They're going to talk to us with our continuation of our theme of the midterms. Monica's going to talk about social media, getting the message out, how to reach people, because I know that was kind of a concern of last meeting. And then David's going to talk about the messaging and what the process is for the Democratic Party and how those messages get down to the committees, and the towns themselves, and the counties. I'm sorry. And then hopefully Leonard will join us afterwards, and he'll actually talk more about the letter to the editor project. I did just shoot him an email because I'm not sure why he isn't on. If he doesn't join us today, no worries, we'll get him another day. But we will have at 7:30, Dr. and Senator Tom Sherman will join us. So that will be exciting to kind of like wrap everything up for the midterms. So with that, I will let Monica and David, you guys can take it from here and take questions when you want. And the floor is yours for about 20 or so minutes. So feel free to fill it how you'd like.
Awesome. I have slides that we've used before. If I think I can go ahead and share my screen real quick.
Yes,
it starts out
do.
with you, David, if you still are cool with that. Great.
For me.
Cool. Okay. Here, David, for you.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for letting us come and join your meeting tonight. I'm David Pourshoushtari. I'm the communications director for the NHDP. I've been on the job for about 3 months now. I'm in my 4th month here. I come to you after being in Colorado for the past 7 years, where Colorado, I have noticed since I've been here, is that Colorado and New Hampshire aren't too dissimilar from each other. Aside from their size, their electorate and the kind of the makeup of their politics are very similar, actually, I've found in some ways. One of the biggest differences, of course, is the fact that we don't really have the Free State Project trying to come here or trying to come to Colorado. Instead, we just have a bunch of QAnon folks, but that's a story for another day. But anyway, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about kind of like the framework of messaging and, just some general rules of thumb of, when you're messaging or communicating. So these are things that you want to think about when you're getting your message out there, especially, your message that is going to match with the values of your town and your community. So these are some general rules of thumb I always like to follow. And, you want to ask yourself some of these questions whenever you're messaging or communicating. Who is this message for? Who is this communication for? And, this can be a lot of different things. This can be for a social media post. This could be for a letter to the editor. This could be for this could be for a conversation that you're having. Who is the message for? And so you want to think about that. So is it like, are you communicating with somebody who is a friendly Democrat? Are you communicating with somebody who's kind of more, straight down the middle? Are you communicating with somebody who is a little bit more of a center right person? So you want to think about and tailor your message to who you are talking to. So you always want to think about is like, who is this for and who is this supposed to be for? You also want to think about, are we talking to our targeted voters? So if you're like, say, if you're running for office or if you know somebody who's running for office, you want to make sure that they're actually speaking to folks who they want or you want to actually turn out to vote. You don't really want to spend your time putting stuff out there to people who aren't necessarily going to be able to vote for you. I mean, frankly, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense for you to speak to somebody in New Mexico when you're running for state house in New Hampshire. So you want to think about, are you talking to your targeted voters or our targeted voters? Are we speaking from our frame? We'll get into that a little bit, but I think framing is a really big issue here that a lot of folks, that not enough folks have really kind of bought into yet. And I will say this, this is sometimes, even the National Party, I think fails to do this sometimes. Speaking from our frame is critical to ensure that we are messaging from our maximum position of from our maximum position of being able to actually have the high ground there. And finally, this is really what it comes down to is, are we selling the brownie or are we selling the brownie mix with this message? This is a metaphor that I learned from Anat Shankar-Asario. She is a pretty well-respected Democratic communications consultant. And she talks about how we as Democrats, do we just culturally, we love numbers. We love statistics. We love facts. We love just really getting into the nitty gritty because we by nature are just a bunch of nerds. And we love that. But sometimes we get really into the nitty gritty and we lose sight of the forest for the trees. So, when you're going down the grocery store, when you're going to Market Basket and you're getting, you're looking at cake mix, if you see the picture on the box, that's not, the powder and all the other stuff that comes inside the box. What you're seeing on the advertisement is exactly what your policy is going to achieve. So let's talk a little less about the brownie mix and let's more so talk about the brownie. To me, a perfect example of this is the infrastructure package. I think we sometimes get a little too hung up on the amount of money and we talk a little less about, exactly what the infrastructure package is going to result in, better roads, better bridges, better ports, all that kind of fun stuff. So let's not sell ourselves short by just selling only the brownie mix and not the brownie itself. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is what we're talking about with the right frame. Now, as I'm sure all of you are aware, the right wing has, mastered this tactic of being able to frame everything as a negative. Any Democratic policy, any Democratic anything that has been put out over the past few decades, over the past half century, frankly, they always turn it into their frame to make it sound bad. They talk about any gun safety policies that common sense gun safety reforms we try to pass as gun control. They try to paint themselves as pro-life when they are passing reproductive freedom restrictions or abortion bans. They cite people who are coming over the border or anybody who's entering this country undocumented as illegal immigrants, illegal aliens to try to otherize them, right? And a big one, really, which has been, we've started to see this since frankly, the 50s is Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. Those are just inherently popular programs. Everybody knows how popular those programs are, but Republicans have for decades labeled them as entitlements. Think about how much we heard about entitlements as Mitt Romney, was pushing it, and how, the more or less Trumpy faction, and frankly, some more of the more Trumpy faction of the Republican Party, as we're seeing, like with the Rick Scotts in the world, calling these things as entitlements. So let's make sure that when you're messaging our policies as Democrats, don't say that opponents of reproductive freedom are pro-lifers, because they're not. That's just frankly false. Don't call them pro-lifers. Don't give them that benefit of the doubt. They're anti-choicers. We are pushing gun safety reform. These are undocumented people. These are undocumented immigrants. Nobody is illegal. And finally, these are earned benefits. Medicare, Social Security, those are earned benefits that people have been paying into for years and years of work in their careers. So these are just all the things that you want to think about with your when you're talking about your issues. As Democratic Party leaders, as especially in the state of New Hampshire, where we're going to have we have presidential primaries, and I 100% believe we will continue to have the first in the nation primary, but that is another conversation for another day. You'll probably get reporters talking to you, asking you for a comment. And if that happens, these are a few things you want to think about and ask yourself. If you get a reporter calling you, does this reporter who's calling you help you push your message? It's always about your message that you want to make sure that you are thinking about. Does this reporter have a narrative in their story that conflicts with your message? Are they trying to push something? Do they have something in mind that they're already pushing? Is this reporter fair? Reporters will sometimes have a certain type of angle that they're trying to push, and you want to make sure, are they going to make that angle the whole focus, or are they going to actually look at both sides of the situation? Is the premise of their question fair? A perfect example of that would be Peter Doocy, who talks to Jen Psaki, our press secretary Jen Psaki at the White House every day. He will ask questions like, let's see, what was the one that he was asking? One that I always go back to is do you guys remember, it was about a year ago, when Major League Baseball, they moved their All-Star game from Atlanta, Georgia, over in protest over their voter suppression law, and they moved it over to Colorado. Do you guys remember that at all? Great. Well, what's the point of that question that Peter Doocy was asking was, does the president believe it's fair to move the All-Star game from Georgia when Colorado's voter laws are actually more suppressive or more restrictive than Georgia's? That right there, that's not a fair premise of the question, because frankly, that's just 100% false. And in will this report a story, if it's fair, reach my targeted voters? So these are just some things that you want to keep in mind, especially if you're a candidate or if you are somebody who is advocating for a candidate. Monica, let's go ahead and go next to another slide. I just wanted to flag these really quickly here for you all. I won't read through all of them, but these are just a few of the right-wing publications that Republicans and the Republican ecosystem has infested the media with publications and right-wing operatives who are frankly not looking to actually report news. They're trying to put clicks up on their websites, and they're trying to get it shared on social media. These are things you want to think about and maybe consider. I would highly actually advise that you don't speak to them. These are some of the big ones that you'll remember. Fox News is, the RT News is, the Breitbarts. Here in New Hampshire, we have the NH Journal. You don't want to talk to them ever. They are a bunch of right-wing hacks. In fact, one of their main writers, he got fired. I remember hearing about it in 2005, about the mid 2000s or so, for making a joke about Columbine. So, that's the type of person that this guy is. And same thing with the Center Square. The Center Square has been typically known to be a pretty conservative news organization. So you want to be really careful. And the folks on the right here, these are some of the folks that you want to think about as far as, especially getting an email from them, whether it's a Michael Graham, a Damian Fisher, a Patrick Hines, who is a GOP columnist, and Christian Wade, who writes for the Center Square. These are folks that you want to keep an eye out on. And if you ever get a question from a reporter, feel free to reach out to Monica and myself, or email press@nhdp.org and just be like, hey, do we know if this person is friendly or not? So feel free to always reach out to us if that ever happens. Monica, next slide. And so when you're talking to, one of the things I want to finish up with here is talking about pivoting. When you're talking about your issues, if you're given a tough question, whether you are speaking to voters, whether you're speaking to folks on the street, whether you are talking to constituents, whether you're talking to anybody, if you're talking, they're asking you about different issues that are involving the Democratic Party. If you're given a tough question, you might want to think about how you can pivot. You want to remember your ABCs. You remember to acknowledge the question, bridge to your talking points, and finally go to the content. But don't forget the R in your ABCs, and that is reframe. And that is in those cases, like those questions that I was telling you about that are leading, that are kind of that don't have the premise of it isn't great. You want to always think about reframing your questions. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. And these are some examples of bridge language, the B and the ABCs that I told you about, that you might want to think about looking at, that there are really useful ways for you to be able to move away from something that is a little bit tougher for you to speak to, like especially if somebody asks you about, say, I don't know, Afghanistan. That's there are certain issues there that people might be a little bit tougher for us to speak to, and then you can talk about ways that you can kind of transition away from that line of questioning and go more towards a line of messaging that is a little bit more advantageous for what you want to talk about. You know, that's a possibility. What we're calling for is that's one view, but we need to look at how this fits the bigger picture, et cetera, et cetera. So these are just a few ways to get yourself out of a tricky situation. And that's pretty much it as far as the communications tactics go. I can go ahead and pass the ball over to Monica, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the importance of owning the space in cyberspace.
Hey, also, I'm Monica. I'm the press secretary at the party. Like Amanda said, if you get emails from the party, they have my name on them. And sorry, I hope you like them. There is a lot. So I'm going to go over just really quickly some top lines about how to best use a couple different platforms of social media. I'm not planning on going too in the weeds on like how to actually do something on social media, but if you ever have questions about that, that's something I'm happy to sit down with you all about. But tonight I'm going to just real quickly talk about some best practices in regards to social media. So for starters, if you're not on Facebook, that's definitely the one I would recommend utilizing the most. Facebook is where like the people are, opposed to Twitter, which is more like where the reporters are. Facebook is a really great mobilization tool for sure. And I would argue that that's probably the best one for grassrootsy kind of organizing. So Facebook is really great for talking directly to a certain body of people, whether that's in a friends list or in a group, anything like that. You can specify your message to different groups of people, which is not something you can do in a place like Twitter as easily. But while using Facebook, I think the big things are to make sure that you're being consistent and accurate, making sure that we're not resharing fun Facebook memes that we see because they're funny, but we don't know if they're true, making sure that we're not putting out intentionally misleading information, even if it misled us too. I'm a big proponent of a Facebook meme, but I do always want to make sure that folks are maybe checking if it's like a crazy stat or something, maybe just do a quick Google search to see and make sure that you're not putting something out in the universe that just isn't correct. The other side does that all the time, and I think it's something that we want to avoid, as well as being aware of what on Facebook is public and private. Facebook has crazy privacy settings. You can tweak things to be just about however public or however private you want them to be, and you can do it for different posts. I'm a big proponent of Facebook groups, which I'm not sure if your committee has one that's just for you all, but there's lots of groups, especially all over the state, that are specific to writing LTEs or, you know, Democratic women in a certain geographical region, whatever. Facebook groups are really helpful to make sure, again, that you're talking to a specific group of people, whether it's about an event that you have coming up, whether it's about answering a question that you have about something, just talking about something that went on. Groups are really helpful for that. As well as pages where you can post things. It's like if you had like a Lee County Dems page, I'm not sure if you do. That way folks can like it and you can post updates, events, fundraising asks, whatever it is. And only the people that you choose to let see that could, or you could make that public. But keeping in mind that everything that goes on social media, whether it's marked as public or not, is public. Just being very careful that even if you're in a private group with folks that you trust, the internet is forever and you're going to want to be really careful. Really quickly, sorry, I know I'm kind of running out of time. Another really important and helpful tool in Facebook is the built-in events feature. I could not recommend this enough. You can do ticket purchases through there. ActBlue is compatible with it. You can do, real-time RSVPs. You can change information if you have like a location change or a time change or something. You can make sure that it's notified. You can make sure that that event can only be seen by people you want to see it. I just really recommend this tool. I don't know if you guys use Mobilize or but you can, make a Facebook event that goes into your Mobilize. It's all super helpful. And then real quickly, I'm sorry, I will jump into Twitter or not. There we go. So again, on Twitter, you want to make sure that you're being consistent and accurate, that the information that you're using or putting out there and resharing is true. If you are on Twitter, which again, Facebook is the thing I recommend the most. If you're new to social media, I would highly recommend starting on Facebook. But NH Politics Twitter is also a pretty fun place to be. Facebook isn't as compatible with hashtags, but Twitter, however, is. And I would recommend using them. If you're talking about politics on Twitter, I would recommend using NH Politics. That way more people will see what you're saying, and you can go down that hashtag and see what other people are saying as well that are specifically about NH politics. There's also NH Sen if you're talking about Maggie Hassan or the Senate race at all. Folks use that. There's NH01 and NH02 talking about congressional races, but NH politics is a big one. So if you do want to dabble on Twitter, I highly recommend, if you're going to tweet about New Hampshire politics, that you're using NH politics and maybe even following it. Another cool thing about Twitter is the direct messaging groups and lists. So like I said, Facebook is a little bit more user friendly, and making sure that the stuff you put out can be better directed to specific places and to make sure that only the people you want to see them can see them. But on Twitter, you can have direct messaging groups. This is something that I use at the party all the time. I have different groups that have different people and I name them differently. And we use these groups to amplify each other's stuff. So if I put out a tweet, whether it's from my personal account, whether it's from the NHDP or Organize NH or whatever, I can throw it in that group and ask folks to amplify it so that they'll retweet it and like it, and it'll get more, and it'll, get out to more people, and they can do the same for me. This can be really helpful if you have something that you really want out there in bigger numbers, whether it's an event you have coming up, something about a local candidate, a fundraising ask, whatever it is. That can be super helpful to make sure that more people see your stuff, and the more eyes that it gets, the more likes, the more retweets, the better it does on the Twitter algorithm, which again leads to more people seeing it, which can lead to more volunteers or money or whatever you're asking for. Twitter also has character limits, which is a little bit hard to manage sometimes, but it also is really compatible with things like links. So it is a good place for sharing events and like on Mobilize or something, or sharing fundraising asks as well. It's definitely more compatible with those things than some other social media forms are. I'm gonna go ahead and skip Instagram for now, just for the sake of time. But really quickly, just to wrap up, just some general best practices while using social media, specifically when talking about politics. Again, I can't emphasize this enough, being honest and accurate. It's really important that, again, the stuff you're putting out there is as true as it can be, in that we're not sharing just active misinformation that can be really harmful to the cause. And considering clickability, so when you're about to post on social media, I always recommend thinking of what you would look at yourself. I personally am less likely to read a really long post about something, and most people are the same. Maybe if you have a lot to say, a lot of characters, highly recommend things like spacing it out a little bit more in terms of like different little paragraphs that makes it a little bit more readable. Things with pictures are much more clickable, whether that's a graphic or an actual photo or something. Just keeping in mind while posting on social media, would I look at this? Is this something that I would just scroll by because it's too long, or isn't engaging looking, or it doesn't have, has a lot of typos or something? That's something that folks will look at too, and are less likely to scroll by something that is a little bit more enticing, which goes into keeping it short and sweet. Like I said, if you have a lot to say and you really need to say it, I know I do that too. I totally get it. Spacing things out can be helpful, but as a general rule of thumb, short and sweet is really always the way to go. Again, that's just how things are more engaging. You're way more likely to read something that's infinitely shorter. So an ideal post, especially something that you really want amplified, has a picture, a photo. If it's on Twitter, it has hashtag NH politics, and it's on the short side. And lastly, anywhere and everywhere. I know that I just kind of ran by this really quickly. And again, I'm happy to sit down with folks at any time who want just more in depth on like the technical side of how to actually use these platforms. But something really helpful to the message in this growing cyber world, as it's getting increasingly more cyber, is just using social media in general is helpful. Posting anywhere and everywhere what you have going on, getting the message out there, especially in a state like New Hampshire, is really helpful. We've got to do a lot of things to be successful in November, and social media can be a big part of that. Just like knocking doors, raising money, calling voters, social media can be a really helpful tool. So getting on there at all and putting your stuff out there is super helpful. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and pause sharing my screen.
Thank you both so much. Do we have any questions for the party?
Well, it's not a question really, it's a comment. I never use Facebook because I basically loathe it. And I think it's damaged our democratic system tremendously. It's been abused, and I just don't want anything to do with it. And so I just use Twitter, and I just use it to get information out mostly. And I mostly am looking for interesting threads or just information. So I'm following a lot of people that provide it, and then I'm trying to get it out again. And that's what I'm mostly using Twitter for. And it's political stuff mostly.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, anywhere and everywhere.
I just really can't stand Facebook, but I'm sure that it's got its uses, but I've just got to put my foot down somewhere.
No, I totally understand. But again, posting anywhere and everywhere, whatever you feel comfortable with. If Twitter is your platform of choice, I know it's mine. For my purposes, yeah, whatever you feel comfortable using is what's best for you. Absolutely. And yeah, I see that you guys do have a Facebook page. That is great.
Yeah. And the other thing I try to be careful about is blocking all the clear bots, right? I'm very liberal about that. Anybody who either doesn't have any or just a few followers and just established their account this month, well, that's not real. I mean, so I don't really seem to have any trouble with trolls. And if I do, I just block them.
Yeah, Susan, no, I've seen your activity on Twitter. I know which, in fact, you and I follow each other on Twitter, and big fan. And I think, kind of like to Monica's point, one of the things that we're trying to do really is one of the biggest advantages that, frankly, the Republicans, the Libertarians, and the Free State have over the Democrats here in New Hampshire right now is their amplification on social media. They are always retweeting and liking and sharing each other's stuff. And, I completely agree with you with Facebook, but the unfortunate reality is that, this is not to say that this is not me telling you get on Facebook. But the reality is that we're facing here is that these are the spaces where a lot of voters are, unfortunately. And I think, what we don't want to do is to cede the ground necessarily to the opposition, to the other side. So any way that you can do it, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Instagram or on Facebook, or any platform that you can get on that you can help us with amplifying the Democratic message is extremely helpful. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing on Twitter. So, and I think that's kind of where Monica was going with that, saying any way that we can try to amplify those messages anywhere is extremely important.
I figure that all the people who are already on Facebook and are comfortable on it can pick that up. And
Mhm.
I'll stick with Twitter and letters to the editor.
Perfect. I see Ruth, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. I was going to ask, so, I mean, I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and I use Twitter more as a news aggregator, and on Facebook, I share more personal stuff, and professional stuff. But, so I'm just wondering, which platform do you think is more important for Democrats? Because I know that Facebook was very important for conservatives, and I don't know how important it will be this time around, because I think Facebook has changed some of its rules. But because of the siloing of Facebook, how important is it to be on Facebook relative to Twitter? In other words, do we just want to amplify our message to fellow Democrats, or and if so, what's the better place to do that? Because I noticed that Sununu is all over both Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
And he manages to make everything, including a cloudless day, look like something he's responsible for on both platforms.
Yeah.
And he's been better at that than anybody. And so he makes himself look like a normal guy on both platforms all the time. And the only one who comes close on our side is Maggie Hassan, who started to post pictures of herself on Facebook and Twitter doing normal things. It's like every other picture of Sununu is him, holding a trout, like my picture there. Like a nice country girl holding a trout. And he's always doing stuff like that, skiing with the kids, opening an ice cream parlor. So he's taking responsibility for everything, sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. And Maggie Hassan's, she's starting to do it, but it's more her looking kind of grim in a photograph with a veteran or something else. Whereas he's managed to just make himself seem like an everyday awesome guy on both platforms. And I don't know why we're not doing that, because he's a Republican. They should be bad at this, but he's better than anybody else.
Yeah. I think that they kind of can be used for different things. I wouldn't say that one is more important than the other. Like I said, like posting everywhere and anywhere to amplify a message is genuinely beneficial. I think they could just be a little bit different. So Facebook, I would say, is more like for the people, that is better, in my opinion, for things like organizing, like getting folks to go certain places, whether that's knocking on doors, events, creating more of like intimate groups to talk about certain things. Like, for example, I know that there's like letter to the editor Facebook groups where folks are like, oh, I think we should get a whole bunch of letters out the door about this kind of thing. Facebook can be really helpful for something like that. And Twitter, in my opinion, is a little bit better for, general messaging, big picture stuff, as well as getting the attention of reporters. So as much as I love to fight with the NHDP on Twitter, that's not something that would really get me very far on Facebook, even though I do love a good Facebook fight as well. But yes.
I'm not friends on Facebook with very many Republicans. Like even my brother has blocked me at this point. So
yeah.
So I mostly talk to other Democrats and we'll tell them about events, but I'm just wondering what we should be doing to sort of out social media Sununu, because he has figured it out. And I don't know if he has to pay for the stuff that he posts on Facebook. I think he gets to use the state of New Hampshire official account to, show a picture of himself eating an ice cream cone with some local people. So he doesn't have to pay for any of that. Whereas I think other people might have to pay for it. And so I just want to know how he's doing all this. Who's his social media director?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is definitely like he has a team, and being the governor has
he's already governor, so he can use the resources of the state to basically advertise himself.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any way to stop that, but that's definitely an advantage he has, and he has not hesitated to use that.
Yeah.
to his advantage. That's why I think he's such a problem.
No. And I think our role as activists and staff and, people, Democrats in New Hampshire who want to win is combating that with also being loud. So are we always going to outdo?
Being loud is not going to cut it. It's got to be, we have to out appeal.
Yeah.
Well, Ruth, I would actually, so I think just really quickly, I know that you all have other meetings to get to, but what I will say really quickly is that don't underestimate the power of amplification of our base. Because again, like from what I've spoken to with other consultants, is that when you think about it this way, the activists and our Democratic base, that's your chorus. You want to get your chorus to be singing and getting your message out there. And if we aren't messaging and amplifying our message, and if we aren't really kind of getting it up, because trust me, the Sununu folks, they are mostly focusing on getting their Republican base and their free state base to be able to amplify anything that he's pushing up. And then anybody else who's a non-Republican or non-free stater will sometimes pick up on that because they're like, oh yeah, look at all these folks who are engaging with this post. So I would say just don't underestimate the power of amplifying Democratic messaging, because sometimes especially in this case, louder is better.
I try to amplify whatever I can. I just feel like he got a head start, and so we need a strategy for catching up. And also maybe we need an angle that he doesn't have. But he seems to have cornered the whole nice guy image, and which is, I think I don't know. What do you think, Sue?
I think that's exactly right. He's cornered this nice guy image, but he's not competent. So you could be the nicest guy in the world. First of all, I think we should ridicule a little bit of ridicule about all these claiming he's responsible for this and that when he isn't. But
he's responsible for shifting a whole bunch of taxes onto us with his stupid voucher plan.
That's not But
I think
nice
people
guy that you can have a beer with, or do you want somebody who helps the people of New Hampshire?
People voted for Bush because they wanted to have a beer with the guy.
Well, they did, and you would think that they learned their lesson about that.
No one ever learns their lesson. That's why we need to start now, and we have to outcompete him because
we have to out him. He's trying his best with this charm offensive, but he is doing rather dastardly things to the people of New Hampshire while he's trying to divert their attention by charming them. And
I feel like we haven't got that negative message out as much. Like I see nice paragraphs on Twitter about, the high cost of this voucher system, but it doesn't come with the graphic that really hits home. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have a visual that goes with it where you're like, oh, that's why our local taxes are going up, because we're paying for all these private schools thanks to Edelblut and Sununu. So
religious private schools too, when one may not share that religion. So, I don't particularly want my tax money going to religions that are not mine. And what if I were an atheist? No. I'd want it even less.
Yeah, you don't want to mention that.
Stop.
I'm just saying, I think
Ruth, please stop. I'm going to mute you. You guys are going down a rabbit hole that is not the point of this meeting.
You and I will talk. We'll talk some other time.
Please do. I appreciate you have good ideas, but strategize offline. So I want to thank Monica and David for all of the time they shared with us and their tips. If you haven't seen it yet, Monica put her contact info in the chat. Feel free to reach out to her. And then if you need anything, obviously I'm able to answer questions as well, but I'd rather push it off to them. So sorry, Monica and David.
Please do, Amanda.
You guys are the best. Thank you. Any last thoughts, comments from either the committee or from you all at the party before we move on?
Thanks for having us. And again, feel free to reach out with any questions, and it was great to meet you all.
Thank you. Fight the power.
Awesome. Thank you all again. And then we'll move on to our next guest speaker who just got a beautiful backdrop. So everyone say hi to Senator Sherman. Although, Tom, I don't know what you actually want us to call you, Senator, Doctor, you have so many fabulous titles. So I hope you address that in your, our conversation. Feel free to, the floor is yours and Kelly's. Feel free to take questions as you want. Everyone will raise their hand and if they have a question, and feel free to do what you'd like for the next 20 or so minutes.
Sounds great. So the joke, since I was a state rep, nobody could figure out what to call me as Mr. Dr. Hey, you state rep. So just call me Tom. But and now a state senator makes it even more confusing. First of all, I love the discussion. It was the discussion that's happening across the state. How do we, when you've got a governor who was in everybody's living room for a year and a half every day or for a year, how do you pin the fact that really very little has improved under his leadership? He won't take responsibility for his failures. He takes responsibility for other people's successes. And how do you do that? It's been likened to nailing Jell-O to the wall, of your living room. You just can't. It's hard to do, but it's not impossible. And I think what you've seen over the last several months, especially since we've veered so sharply to the right, is that there has been some effective messaging, but it's undoing this image, even among Democrats, that he's a nice guy. Think of how many Democrats voted for him in the last election, even though he had set the record on vetoes, vetoed over a dozen climate bills that were mostly bipartisan, and essentially stopped any progress we were making on climate change prior to him becoming governor. We have 400 overdose deaths a year, still 6 years into his governorship. We have 51 children in our emergency rooms in acute mental health crisis a year ago, 5 years into his governorship. I mean, this is not rocket science. The problem is he is very successfully talking out both sides of his mouth, and he's telling people what they want to hear, that everything's fine, but it's not. And so my hope is to give you two nice guys to choose from, one who has a track record of actually doing what he says, and the other one who will take credit for other people's work and won't take responsibility for his own failures. So that's in a nutshell it. That's not what I usually say, but I jumped in right on the tail end of this wonderful discussion between Ruth and Susan. And I don't know if you go by Sue or Susan, but I hear that frustration every time I'm on, and people say, how do we hold him accountable? And the fundamental is look at what he has not done, not what he says he has done, because there's so much that he has not done. And you can list at least 10 high priorities. What he has done, though, is he has let this far right free state movement take us completely off track. I think we can all agree that the idea of the first ban on women's reproductive freedom in the history of the state of New Hampshire is not something we should let him stay in office over. We have to hold him accountable for that. And it's not just a ban on abortion. Remember, it's state-sanctioned invasive procedures on women who want abortions. I can't imagine, as a doctor, to me, that's probably the most egregious thing that we can be doing as a state, is telling women that they must have an invasive procedure. Another one is, I don't know if you've all seen Lisa Akey on before. Hi, Rebecca. But Lisa Akey is just a wonderful, wonderful person. I spent a day with her at Dartmouth Hitchcock. She has twins right now One is not expected to live and has a fatal fetal anomaly, fits under that. And she has been the spokesperson for women who need to have control over not only their reproductive freedom, but that of their children, the fetus that they're carrying. And so hopefully Rebecca Perkins Quokka and I will be voting to get rid of that part of the abortion ban. That's not all he's done, though. And the other things that he's done that are so far to the right that it makes New Hampshire unrecognizable is demonizing experienced, high quality, top-notch teachers and making them targets for disgruntled parents. That's not the New Hampshire way. And it's certainly not going to make New Hampshire a place where we can attract really wonderful teachers to our public school system. And finally, talking about the voucher program, it's the most robust program in the country. It was budgeted to be about 3 million, and now it's up to 8 million of taxpayer dollars. And guess what? 90% of the kids whose parents have chosen to do this were already in private school. So it is functionally state subsidized private, religious, and homeschooling with virtually no accountability. There is no other entitlement in any of our systems, state or federal, that are so cavalier in their basically giving away taxpayer dollars. And Senator Khan and I both had bills in to rein that in, make it more accountable. And unfortunately, the state Senate killed both. The Republican majority in the Senate killed both of our bills. At the same time that this public money for private school is happening and religious school, $100 million were cut from our public schools in the budget. This is not the New Hampshire we know. The New Hampshire we know and love and we value, our shared values, whether you're Republicans, Democrats, or independents, have to do with our personal responsibility and then our responsibility and sense of community commitment. That's why we have these small town meetings, and that's why you see people being so engaged at a volunteer level throughout the state. But it is not consistent with what we've seen. So one of the reasons I'm running for governor is to get us back on track, get us back to a New Hampshire that is one that we know, one that is consistent with our values, because another 2 years with Sununu is very predictable. What you've seen is what you will get. And so anything less than that is probably not consistent with the reality of who Sununu is. The second part of this is we need to pivot as we get back on track and really start addressing the daily concerns of the vast majority of New Hampshire residents. And number one on that list for the vast majority of New Hampshire residents and small businesses is going to be property taxes. We saw in 2011, under Republican leadership, they basically shifted almost all of the state responsibility for municipal programming onto the municipalities. And that was the way they balanced the budget. Lo and behold, after that, we've had multiple surpluses. And rather than give it back to the towns, back to the property taxpayers, they've given it to large out-of-state corporations like Walmart, or now most recently, they've given it to the wealthiest people in New Hampshire. These things need to stop. We need to focus back on the vast majority of New Hampshire people, our neighbors, our families, our children, our grandchildren, and make sure that we're providing property tax relief, affordable housing. And I'm glad Rebecca's on because she's the guru of affordable housing, and also affordable childcare. Remember, have you ever been called that, Rebecca? By the way, this is Senator Perkins. You all probably know her, Senator Perkins Quokka.
The guru? I don't know.
I called you the guru. I called you the guru of affordable housing. You're certainly the one I go to for expertise, and it's wonderful to have her in the Senate. She's just been amazing. But these are the things that we need to be focusing on. Right now, there are 14,000 children waiting for childcare in New Hampshire, affordable childcare. Think of what that would do for our workforce if we were able to get those children into the childcare and allow their parents to go to work like they want to. That's one of our biggest issues. It's not, you can't walk around and say our economy is super strong because we have a 2.5% unemployment rate. To me, the more important number is the number of job openings, because that's a reflection of where our economy could be. Because if we could fill those job openings with enough support for workforce, we would start seeing the economy blast off to levels that we've just never imagined, with productivity and with people really being able, companies being able to meet their potential. And then after we are back on track, we're starting to address the day-to-day concerns. We think about all the other areas that have just been flat or gotten worse under Sununu. Think of it. We've got the mental health crisis, which has always been one of my biggest passions. Substance use, again, it's flat. It's not gotten better. And in many ways, it's getting worse. Children at risk in our state, DCYF, and making sure that the children that are our responsibility are well cared for, well supported. Climate, as I said, Sununu vetoed more than a dozen bipartisan bills in the last biennium that would have really taken us to a whole new level of our approach to combat climate change. But it didn't happen. All of these and many more are areas where this guy, who people like, has not really made any progress. And yet we also see where he has taken us, which is completely off track from where New Hampshire people, that values that we all hold. This is something that I am passionate about. I will be, and I already am, as Kelly will tell you, my campaign manager, I am already 150%, maybe 200% engaged in. I'm meeting with people all over the state. As soon as we get a little warmer weather, we'll be hitting the road and going all over the state. I'll be doing the work that it takes to get my name known for the people of New Hampshire, because one of the things that working in the legislature for 4 terms has taught me is how to get something done in New Hampshire. It's not like being a corporate CEO. You can't just say, do this, do that, or you're fired. That's not the way it works. New Hampshire is most effective as a place where people work together. They work across the aisle. They work collaboratively. You identify the problems. You go to the legislature. You work with them to craft the legislative solutions. You make sure those solutions make it through the legislature intact and really come out the other end with the goal of solving those problems in the final legislative package. And that's what you sign. And when you sign those bills, you start seeing problems getting solved. You start seeing festering crises finally being addressed. I know how to do it. I've done it before. And this is, for me, the most rewarding part of my career that I've ever had. And I think bringing that forward for the state of New Hampshire is something that I would love to do. So I hope I'll have your support. I really look forward to meeting you all in person when we hit the road and the weather is a little less New Hampshire spring, mud season and all that. And I would love to take your questions and comments.
Thanks, Tom. That was great. I guess my question is, in 2020, I like to watch YouTube, and every time I clicked on a video, I got an ad telling me how a Democrat was going to raise my taxes. Sometimes it was a generic Democrat. Sometimes it was a particular Democrat, but it was always a Democrat, and he was always going to raise my taxes. And I never saw anything from the Democrats. And when I did see things from the Democrats, they were telling me to vote. And I was going to vote anyway. But I think people listened and they went and voted, and they didn't vote for Democrats because they were going to raise their taxes. And it really was pissing me off.
Right. Well, I
That's
share
not a
your
question.
Yeah.
Go
No,
ahead.
it is. So remember, my district right now is 3% Republican, and I've won in this district repeatedly. You don't win in a 3% Republican district if you can't defend against that kind of garbage that the Republicans were throwing at us. I had Republicans on my mailers saying this is a lie. Tom has never voted for an income tax, never voted for a sales tax. By the way, this was paid family medical leave. And also, by the way, it wasn't mandatory. There were multiple ways that a company or the person could opt out of that program. The most important pivot, though, is to turn it back to Sununu, who I call Mr. Property Tax, and say, I've never voted for an income tax. I've never voted for a sales tax. And Sununu vetoed property tax relief in 2019. Did you know that? He vetoed it. In our budget that we presented to him, which he vetoed, there's $40 million in direct funding, 20 of it for education, for the school programming relief, $20 million in direct block grants back to communities. And he vetoed it. So he's Mr. Property Tax. We're number 3 in the country for the level of property tax. It's only gone up under his leadership or lack thereof. And in the end, that's the way I won in 2020. By the way, the same margin I won in 2018, in spite of all of that rhetoric. It's just not true. It was just a lie. And the Republicans in my district listened, they knew it, and they also knew that I was fighting for property tax relief. And if we can all pivot in the same way, I put out a really glossy, glitzy video of me standing in my front yard saying, I never voted for it. It worked. And we got some really great leaders in my district who were Republicans to come out and say, this is not true. That message is one that I have successfully beat in a Republican district and gotten reelected. It's unfortunate that we didn't have a more robust response across the state, because I agree with you, it did have an impact. But I have no problem saying who the real villain is in the room. And it's not paid family medical leave. It's the fact that the vast majority of New Hampshire people and businesses are still being socked with unrelenting property taxes while we're giving away revenue to the wealthiest and to the out-of-state corporations. By the way, remember one other thing, and this is something that I think whatever you've seen in the first 6 years of this governor, that's what you're going to see in the next 2, if not worse. Democrats voted for Sununu in the last race in large numbers. And by the way, Democrats did not vote for executive counselors, and they did not vote down ballot. So one of my huge commitments, and I don't mean huge like I just mean it's one of my top commitments. One of the things, I've met with the Senate caucus, I've met with the House Democratic caucus, and I've said, we've all got to get elected. We've all got to work together to make sure we get back the majorities and take back our state. And we all have to be out there talking about voting blue all the way down the ballot, voting for the Democrat for executive counselor, and making sure that we don't cross over. Please don't vote for Chris Sununu. Go have a beer with him and watch the Patriots, but recognize that the reason we are where we are today is because he signed that budget. Put the responsibility on the guy who did it. And that's what we have to start doing. And that's the messaging that I will be putting out there throughout, which is the responsibility belongs with the guy who signed the abortion ban, divisive concepts, vouchers. You can't duck that. His signature's on it.
Well, my question for you, Tom, is, you know, the state needs to figure out how to generate some income. And one, I believe that the state has missed out on a couple opportunities. One is looking at some legalized gambling, call it whatever you want, progressive, recessive tax, and legalizing marijuana. I mean, you know, you look at the states around us are taxing it. New Hampshire likes to advocate that it's the cheapest place to come and buy alcohol. And then we talk about the number of people that are substance abusing. Kind of a crazy situation when you promote let's drink and drive. But I think we need to figure out ways to generate more income. Without income, property taxes are not going to go down. They may go down from a state level, but they're going to stay at the town level and the school level extremely high.
Great point. We have had a surplus the last 3 biennia. And where has that surplus gone? Surplus went to get rid of the interest and dividends tax. That's $140 million a year. Surplus went every single biennia to decrease the business profits tax and the BET. All of that could have been going towards property tax relief. In terms of generating more revenue, I have always opposed, the last time the casino came up, I was state rep for Ryan Newcastle, and I would have been, if you all know a little whaling history, I would have been keel hauled out in Newcastle if I had voted for casinos. But I also, on the issue of cannabis and marijuana, I was one of the architects, along with a group of other state reps, for therapeutic cannabis. And in fact, on the front page of the Portsmouth Herald, they called me the pot doc, which I'm not sure was really great for my image. But the bottom line is, I agree with you wholeheartedly on cannabis and marijuana. It should be legal in the state of New Hampshire. We should be capturing that tax revenue. I don't believe really it's a great idea to do it like our state liquor stores, because for several reasons. One of which is that it means we have to build out a whole new infrastructure, which is going to cost a lot in overhead, rather than turning it over to people like some of our dispensaries who are doing a great job with therapeutic cannabis and would love to have an opportunity to participate in legalized recreational marijuana. The only caveat to my support for recreational marijuana is that I think we need to be a little bit smarter than we were about vaping with our young people. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to block any kind of marketing or branding that would make it more attractive for our young people. And that might mean limiting edibles and a few other things, but there's a lot of great data on how to do this properly. And I think we can, and we can do it well. The other myth that I think is out there about recreational marijuana is that it's a gateway drug. I'll tell you, it's a gateway drug as long as the only place you can buy it is from a dealer who happens to have everything else available on their menu, like crack and heroin and all the other, and fentanyl and the other opioids. And that was something I learned when I served on the Joint Task Force back in 2016 on the opioid epidemic, where we had people who were suffering from substance use disorder in recovery telling us marijuana is not the gateway drug. The contact with the dealer is the gateway. And so that is part of many states. For example, Rhode Island is making huge strides on fighting substance use in the state. So I think there is a way to do this. that it doesn't leave us as the only state. I mean, we're surrounded by 3 states and a country that all have legalized marijuana. But we should do it correctly when we do it.
Ruth, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, what's your plan for dealing with the Free Staters? Because, you know, they were pesky before. Now they're a damn nuisance. They're, you know, they're firing their local police departments and then making the state troopers do their work for
Right.
them. They're just,
And they-
you know, it's another case of them shifting their costs onto the rest of us. But not only that, their stated goal is to ruin public education so that everybody takes their kids out of public schools. And
look who our commissioner is.
well, he's put all Free Staters on there, and they basically said we're in charge of who gets this money, and we can give it to whoever we want.
Right.
And they don't want to give it to anybody who opposes their agenda. So how are you going to deal with these people who don't want government to be successful at anything?
Well, I take
That's
a
why they
lot of,
came here.
right. Yep. And they were invited here by a former one-term governor, and they have come in droves, and they now have control of the House, really.
Yeah.
The bottom line is they don't have control of New Hampshire, and the New Hampshire that we know and care very deeply about spoke very loudly in March in the municipal elections. Free Staters didn't win in March. Free Staters lost in March in a big way. The people who stood up for children and public education won in our school elections. The people who stood up for sensible, common sense, viable municipalities and town government and city government, they won in the March election. And if we give them strong candidates, if we give that same group of voters strong candidates who are very clear about what they stand for, who can articulate the issues, who can talk about what they do and what they plan to do, and who have a track record of getting things done, we will prevail in November. And that's the way we beat the Free Staters. We're not going to beat them by driving them out of the state. That's not, we're going to beat them by winning. And we will win if we are all together. And that's one of my huge commitments that I've put forward, that idea that we have to be working together, that the caucuses have to be working together, that our messages have to be together. And I served on the Blue Hampshire Task Force. I did a lot of listening and a lot of reading of all the comments. And a lot of people who were running for state rep, which by the way, of course, I had done twice, those people were really feeling very much alone in 2020. And I heard that, and they are not alone. We're going to do this together. And that's why I've reached out so far. Kelly can tell me if I'm wrong, but we've called probably over 100 state reps. We've connected with well over 75 to 80 of them. And I have endorsements from the vast majority of those, probably over 75 at this point. I'm not looking necessarily for the endorsement. I want them to know that they're not alone in their campaign, and that I will be there if they need help or if they want a resource. And the NHDP, to their credit, now with Ryan Mahoney overseeing both caucuses, is providing a lot of that support that they've asked for. And the town committees, you had the NHDP here before me, and they are reaching out in a way that I've never seen them reach out before. We're going to win in November, and that's the way we take back our state, just like we won in March in the town elections. So I'm really hopeful. I think there are a loud, snarky sounding group of people, but they're a minority, and we can take it back.
So what does I mean, it's a little early, but what does polling show on this? I don't have the same hope just because I got a bad feeling, Tom.
Well, I understand that, and a lot of people do, but you know,
You're not going in the right direction.
Right. I think the best polling is the last election result. And it was only a month ago. And that showed that when we get our message clear, and the message that really drove the March elections in many of the towns was public education. The message that I think is working right now across the state at the state level is making sure people understand how far we have lurched to the right, and making sure that people understand that when I sit down and I explain vouchers to people and I really get into the weeds on it, their jaw drops. They cannot believe that you can enroll your child in kindergarten with one means test and draw up to $8,000 a year in state taxpayer dollars for the next 12 years for that child with no further means testing. They can't believe that that parent could walk away with $96,000 per child over a 12-year period with no subsequent means testing. But that's the reality. And
Yeah, I know.
so-
I think that's the message to get out. I'm worried that we didn't get on it early enough. So I guess we're going to have to just keep shouting it. And the other thing I'm worried about is that, that last round of elections happened before inflation really kicked in. And so our school budget went up quite a bit this past year. Most of it was justified in my view, but some of it wasn't. But it's going to get a lot higher next year when inflation kicks in, because they're going to have to pay more for everything that they use, and they're going to have to pay their teachers more. Rents are one of the things that have gone up the most in the last year. So people need a place to live. So I'm worried that it's only going to get worse, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing any of us can do about this next year of inflation, but it's going to get worse.
Well, you can point out that the reason rents are going up is because our current governor has done nothing about affordable housing until he's given $100 million by the feds to do something.
Yeah.
And Jean Shaheen just sent a letter to him saying, you're screwing this up. And so, I would turn what you're saying around a little bit. And I would say, there is a positive message to come out of this. And that message is, where could we be under better leadership? Not just me, but across the board. Where could we be with better leadership in the House? Not better Democratic leadership, but elect enough Democrats so we have better leadership, which is then Democratic leadership. Right now, the most frustrating thing in the Senate is to have watched the budget bill come through with all those awful things that we've talked about already and see a party line vote 14-10. How do we change things? We change things by making sure that we are all working our tails off until November to get the message out. And the message cannot be one of, we have to just beat Sununu. The message cannot be one of how bad the legislature is right now. The message cannot be just that, horrible people are taking over the state of New Hampshire. The message has to be where we can be. There has to be vision. There has to be this sense that we can get there. That's what gets people to the polls, is saying, here's where we are. Here's how far off track we are. But if
it sounds like property tax relief is going to be the way to go then, because I think that will motivate people. If you actually have a plan for getting property tax relief, even though costs are going to go up, there are things that we can do.
We actually already have a plan, and we introduced it this session, and it was killed by the Republicans. And the really interesting thing, which was one of the things I was hoping for, one of the reasons why I jumped in as late as I did, was because I wanted to do everything I possibly could to make sure there wasn't a primary. But I couldn't wait any longer, because the other reason I jumped in when I did was I wanted to make sure that our message got out while we were still in session. while we were still in the legislative session. And what happened when I started screaming about property taxes and when the Democratic Senate caucus started talking about property taxes, all of a sudden, the op-ed and the union leader is the two leaders of the Republican caucus talking about how much they're doing for property taxes. Well, if you look at what they're claiming, those were Democratic initiatives, including the one that Jeb Bradley introduced, which was a 7.5% give back on pensions to local municipalities. Guess who wrote that bill? The late Rennie Cushing. So Rennie wrote that bill, not Jeb Bradley. These aren't original ideas. These are Democratic ideas that went down in flames because we didn't have the majority. And now they're claiming ownership of them. And we are not going to let that happen. And we're going to continue to hammer Mr. Property Tax, that's Sununu, every chance I get to make sure that the people of New Hampshire know what his real record is. Don't listen to what he says. Look at what he has done and not done. And that's the real assessment. And that also tells you what's going to happen over the next 2 years if he's still governor. So, I hope that's an answer. I am not the least bit discouraged. I am absolutely confident we can take back this state. We can not only take it back, but we can take it to a whole different level. Because when we start solving the problems, one of the things that we've talked about on the Seacoast is if we get people in recovery, then they need jobs. Wow, we need workers. So let's make sure they have all the tools to do that. So we are talking about training, not just training for a job, but also executive functioning, training how to live life, and how to get back on your feet, how to stay on your feet, how to keep those supports in place while you start doing something that for many people is very scary, which is going back to work. It's not easy. Susan, you've had your hand up. Are you next or?
Yeah, I think so. How do I get rid of that? Let's see.
Well, we'll just remember.
Yeah, you go ahead. I'll do it.
Okay, I got it. So just going back to the anti-woman agenda, I don't know what to call it. That
I call it institutional misogyny. How do you like that one? I came up
like
with that,
but a lot of people won't understand it really.
I know, but it's kind of I thought it was kind of clever. I actually used it after they voted to get rid of two parts of a bill that would allow accommodations in the workplace for pregnancy and breastfeeding. I said, this is absolutely ridiculous. We're talking about workforce and we're not allowing women to breastfeed or be pregnant in the workplace. How is that helping workforce? Anyway, go ahead. That's where that came from.
This whatever anti-woman agenda,
Right.
war on women.
Yep.
I think goes back to 2011 and 12. But I think when Carol Shea Porter was in office, we went to great lengths to actually not use the term anti-choice. We used to talk about government interference in healthcare or lifestyle or end of life or whatever decisions. Just these are personal decisions,
Right.
or private decisions. And what is the government doing, making decisions for individuals? This seemed to us to be in line with the thinking in this state, the live free business. How is it living free if the government is making your decisions for you about deeply personal events in your life, like what type of health care you're going to get or anything else? I mean, and that seemed to work well on our more conservative correspondence. I think I wrote the form letter for that one.
So,
And-
right. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
So I just think that instead of talking about choice, I know that wasn't you, that was the party. That just sets up a whole different, I don't know, sort of a women's liber thing. And if, but if you talk about the government interfering in people's personal decisions, private decisions, that I think is more defensible and more in tune with the state culture.
Sue, I like the last NARAL slogan of trust women to make their own choices, which I think is a little bit less, I mean, it's more commonsensical. Like, I trust women to make their choices, not Governor Sununu.
Yeah, but they don't trust women. What they don't trust is the government.
Right.
A
So
lot of
what, I've been battling for women's reproductive rights since I got into the legislature, actually before that as a physician for many years. But there were always a dozen bills that would come in, and they were those cookie cutter national bills that some state rep would file or a senator would file. And you'd walk in as a doctor and say, here are the implications of this bill. It's going to do this statewide to the practice of medicine. And they go, oh, maybe we shouldn't do it. And we were able to kill the bills over and over again. A couple of things have changed, but one thing that's been really consistent, and that is exactly what you said, which is the highest polling objection in the state of New Hampshire across both parties is the idea that the state is getting in between anybody and their provider, whether it's a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a PA, and their patient. And that has been polling in over 80% statewide in general over the last several years, fairly consistently.
Yep.
A little lower down, you get into women's reproductive rights. So you're getting a little bit narrowed in your focus, but it still is very solid that women should be allowed to make their own healthcare decisions.
Yes.
So what I try to do when I'm articulating this, I don't use the word choice because for exactly the reasons you've talked about, there's a connotation with it that makes it sound, sort of, it's been a little bit demonized or a lot demonized by the pro-life movement. But you can say the same thing using different words. You can say women's reproductive rights, getting, not allowing women to make their own decisions about their healthcare future. There's all sorts of ways to describe this. Generally, what I use as my guide is I talk to Planned Parenthood and say, okay, how are we articulating this? And we meet with them fairly regularly to make sure that we are all giving the same message as much as possible, especially at the elected official side, so state reps and state senators. I think you're right, though, that the number one thing that New Hampshire residents don't believe in is the government getting in between a provider and the patient. This argument, interestingly, has been swiped by the anti-vax movement to say, well, if you don't like abortion and you think that's getting in between a doctor and the patient, how can you possibly tell me I have to have a needle in my arm? And the way I answer it is, nobody's telling you have to have a needle in your arm. What they're saying is that if you want to participate in certain things, you have to be vaccinated. And guess what? That gets not to personal freedom, that gets to personal responsibility and community and safety. Nowhere, and actually, by the way, it's protected in the Constitution that the state can do this, in the state constitution. But it's also nowhere does the state say you can go out and drink and get behind the wheel of a car and kill somebody. That's your right, personal freedom. No, we have personal responsibility, and that's the difference. the state has the ability to say, you know, when it impacts other people, you have to, the state has a right, has a compelling interest to make sure that everybody is equally protected. And so that messaging has gotten sort of taken over by the anti-vax movement. And you know, as a doctor on Health and Human Services, the most frustrating thing to see is how Republican leadership has actually tried to find a compromise with that. And the only thing that's being compromised is the health of our children and people who can't get vaccinated.
Yeah.
And I think we all realize that COVID, while a lot of people get better, you know, a lot of people don't. And a lot of people end up with, it's a fairly large percentage end up with chronic COVID, long COVID, and a lot of people have died in the state. So we have to take these things seriously.
Yes. Good. I think that the way you talk about it will work. Yeah, good.
Good.
I didn't like that anti-choice thing on the party's messaging thing.
No, and I,
It's just a little dated now, don't you think, Sue?
Oh, yeah, I do.
You know, I mean, it's not
Also-
that it's exactly wrong. Although people will say, oh, well, you choose to kill a baby. But I think framing it as, I don't need the governor coming into the doctor's office with me and telling me what kind of healthcare I need.
Exactly. That's that.
especially not necessarily your state rep. Katrine,
That-
you had a question? You had your hand
Yeah.
up for a while.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, in our town, the last big election, we literally went Democratic down the ballot and then picked up our pens and moved over to Sununu. So I just really am very nervous because I think the biggest thing that he does really well is make it seem like he's middle of the road. And I just think that I love hearing you articulate. It's vital that we explain why he's not okay. None of my friends that they were really torn. They're like, oh, you know, I mean, he's not that bad. So we really have to articulate that he is that bad and then give the hope and the change.
I would give, yeah, I'm sorry. I would give people the permission to have their memory of him in their living room for a year, making them feel better about COVID, making them feel safe, making them feel like somebody was in charge and somebody was, give them that permission. Say, I don't think you necessarily win by saying he's an evildoer and he's all that. You can say, you know what, during COVID, having him in our living rooms every day for many people in New Hampshire was reassuring. But
Right. That's the key.
it's the but.
Right.
And on COVID, just so you know, and I'll try to say this very briefly, if you want the details, go and look at the op-ed that Bill Marsh and I did last December. He completely dropped the ball starting a year ago. And not only did he completely drop the ball, people paid the price of him not leading on COVID. And they paid the price with the Delta surge, with the Omicron surge, with our hospitals being full. And it wasn't just the people with COVID. It was the people who couldn't get the care they needed because the hospitals were full with people with COVID. So that is on the governor. So when people say, oh, he did a great job with COVID, he did.
I don't think so.
He was comforting to a lot of people when it was so scary.
Right. He just left.
Starting in June of 2021, he did nothing.
Right.
Well, not nothing. He was skiing, and
Well, he was skiing. I almost got to give him his booster.
he was eating,
in the next line.
ice cream. He was, he was greeting kindergartners. I mean,
Without a mask.
Without a mask. I mean, I don't doubt that he loves New Hampshire, but I think it'd be a great idea to have a chart showing property taxes going up while he eats ice cream and COVID deaths going up while he goes skiing.
You could have a graphic of him skiing on that slope.
Yeah, I mean.
There you go, Kelly. That's going to be it.
I do
Venzke is on the slope of COVID deaths. That's probably
personally, he
not
seems
very.
like a nice guy. He doesn't attack people. I do think he loves the state, but he's done a terrible job, and you just can't see that through all of the PR that he's so successfully done.
Well, there's what appeals to your objective self and what appeals to your emotional self, and that's been an issue with politics forever, which is, so Michael, I'm a pretty nice guy. My wife loves me, and
I bet there's more than one person out there.
but and we could have a contest of I surf, he doesn't. I
Yeah,
ski, he does. We could have that. Who could do? Yeah, we could
But
do.
Can I just finish my, I apologize.
Oh, go ahead.
What I was going to ask is that one of the things that worried me is that there wasn't enough difference. There wasn't enough to see and to focus on and to really attract people. And I would like to request, I'm sure you're aware of it, and I just hope that your plan is to really make sure there's diversity in your staff and around you, and that you're really bringing in a lot of different voices and helping us see that, because I think that we're looking for something different. And I see, women doing really well in races. I see a lot of people doing well that are showing that. And I just hope that you can bring that as you're running.
Well, you'll notice that my campaign manager is a woman.
Love that.
In fact, right now, Kelly, I think almost our entire staff is women. My wife trained me well. She said, if you want to win and you want to be surrounded by brilliance, don't hire men. Right. We have already met with BIPOC, which is the business group, people of color, and had a wonderful meeting with them. We're meeting with the Latina caucus. We're meeting,
good.
And we actually were with the Asian, I'm going to get it wrong.
AAIP.
Yeah, the AAIP. If you look at Sununu's administration, there are some women and all the rest are white guys.
Yep.
And that's not going to happen. We will have, I think people, for many, many, many different reasons, our leadership should reflect our population. Mm-hmm. The simplest is to inspire confidence and to provide an aspirational group where young people can say, hey, I see somebody up there who looks like me. I can be there one day. All these things are really high priorities for me.
Good, thank you.
Anything else?
Katrina, I looked up your numbers. In Lee, 70% went for Biden in 2020. 60% went for Amanda and for Mark McKenzie, who is executive counsel on the D side, and 45% went for Feltus. So, it's pretty clear that trouble was at the top here, Tom, and how do we know this is not happening again? This is what I want to know.
Well, the only way you can know that it's not happening again is go out tomorrow and call all of your Democratic friends and say, I met Tom Sherman and I want you to meet him too. If you stay silent, it's going to happen again. And I'm just being blunt.
Lay it on us, Tom. Tell us.
Yeah. So
he's not silent, Tom, but we need to see you on YouTube. We do need to see your face. We need ads everywhere.
Oh, I did a YouTube live. When was that, Kelly? Last week, 2 weeks ago?
Yep.
It was
live town hall.
Live town hall.
We need ads interrupting our funny cat videos.
You're gonna get those, don't you worry.
Yeah, those will be coming.
Do you have any pets?
Yes, Maya, the big white dog.
The big white dog.
Yeah, if you go to my website, you'll see Maya. I'm holding her across my lap, along with and my family's there too. So this has been really great. Does anybody have any additional questions? This has been really helpful for me and I really appreciate it. I hope we will stay in touch and can't wait till it's warmer so I can come visit in person.
Well, we'd love to meet you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I got lots of questions, Tom, but I'm gonna let you go. Thanks for talking to us.
You bet. Send them over though. Send me the questions. We'll try to get you back some answers as quickly as we can.
Hey, Kelly, can you drop your contact info in the chat?
Yep.
Ooh, a housing committee. That's a good idea.
Yeah, Katrin, don't give my seat away.
No, your seat, but we can, there's no rule. You can't have 2 lead Dems. And let me tell you, we need some Dems. So please, if you're interested, 3rd Monday every month at noon. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but vital, we get housing.
Dean, you should do it.
Do what?
Be on the housing committee.
Thank
I
you
don't
for,
have time, but Dean has time.
Oh yeah, I'm loaded with time.
Well, once
Thank
the-
you all so much for participating. Tom and Kelly, thank you so much for being here. You all are great. I'll see you all next month. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Hi, Sue. I hope we see you soon in person.
Yeah, me too.
It's been forever.
Absolutely. It's stupid COVID.
I know.
Ugh.
We have to get back to the swing of things. Well, we should have an
Thanks,
event.
Amanda. Bye,
We
Sue.
should have an event, host an event for Democrats when the weather's better.
Yeah, outside or something.
Yeah,
the weather's good.
I'm hosting a retirement party at the first week of May, and then after that, things open up.
Yeah. Yeah,
It'll be pretty fun.
I'd be all for that.
Yeah, that
I
would be
think
good.
that'd be great.
So
Anyway.
anyway, well,
All right.
I have grading to do, unfortunately. And
Yes.
I'm chairing my department next year, so I have to brace myself for that.
A professor's work is never done.
Oh, and it's not what you think it is. It's a lot more paperwork and meetings and reports.
Yeah.
So, anyhow,
Oh.
I hope I see you soon.
Yeah, me too. Bye now. Bye,
Bye.
Amanda.
Bye, Amanda. Thanks for hosting.